10 new cards have been announced and they're joining the classic set. Also, Vanish and Mind Blast are rotating. Let's talk about it.
Hey buddy, watch this.
That's right, Hall of Fame replacements are here as I teased. 10 new cards to talk about and review. And we're going to do some quick reviews. So if you want to jump right to those and skip me describing them in my normal long-winded ways, you can hit the link in the description. Otherwise, let's walk through all 10 of these new classic cards. Up first here, new legendary card in the neutral set, High Inquisitor Whitemane, a 7-mana, 6/8 battlecry, summon all friendly minions that died this turn. So fantastic character, I'm super excited to see in the game, and a new legendary is always awesome, but unfortunately, like a lot of the cards in this video, I don't think Whitemane is going to be particularly powerful. You might think like, ooh, a Kel'Thuzad, how exciting. But I don't think she works nearly that well because she only works in a conditional environment. In other words, you have to line things up perfectly to play her. And that was true with some regard to Kel'Thuzad, but not always, because you could play Kel'Thuzad defensively and like hide him behind a taunt, and he would work on your opponent's turn. Whitemane alternatively only works on your turn, and you have to have this scenario where you're trading in minions. Now, beyond that, for her to be really exciting, I think you need bigger minions. You want to like trade in 5/5s and get a really big board back. But if you've already got multiple 5/5s on board, what are you trading into? Why are you trading? Are you already winning the game? So in a lot of ways, she feels like a win more card. The scenarios where she probably makes the most sense is where you're trading in like a handful of small minions, but then those aren't nearly as exciting to get back. Like you're trading in a bunch of lackeys and summoning a bunch of new 1/1s. It's not typically a 7-mana sort of play. Now, I will admit the 6/8 stat line here is okay, so she's not like a super punishing thing to play in and of herself. That's going to make her an amazing card in Arena, for instance, but in constructed environments, I don't see what decks are going to be playing her and when they're going to be excited about it, because often they're just going to have an empty board and a totally stranded High Inquisitor Whitemane in hand. She's not going to do anything a majority of the time. So outside of some crazy combo with like some, maybe you're killing off leper gnomes like a million times in a row, that's always a possibility with a card like this. I just don't see her seeing a lot of play in regular sorts of decks. Up next here, we have Brightwing, another new neutral legendary, another character I love. 3-mana, 3/2 dragon, battlecry, add a random legendary minion to your hand. Now, as we've seen with a lot of other cards, unfortunately, legendary minions just aren't that good on average. There's all those whiffs, the Millhouse Mana Storms, the Lorewalker Chose, the Duskfallen Avianas, etc. So a card like Brightwing is really risky to run because you might just get some garbage and you made a pretty weak tempo play in the meantime. But, there's still a little bit of value inherent to this card. You're turning it into something new. If you just wanted a legendary, you might run that legendary instead. But for a deck that has like Battlecry synergies or bounce effects or cares about dragons for one reason or another, this might just be like the best on-curve dragon for turn 3. And she's not a terrible punishing sort of play. She reminds me of Messenger Raven for Mage, just with a different minion or result on the battlecry, and that card seems to feel okay as well. So I don't have like a total lost hope for Brightwing. She's reasonable enough that she could pop into a dragon style deck or a battlecry style synergy deck, but for the most part, I just think because the random legendaries are so weak on average, there's not enough other upside on this card for it really to make the cut in a majority of decks that are looking for value specifically. Now let's talk about Gift of the Wild for Druid, an 8-mana spell that merely gives your minions +2/+2 and taunt. I think this card is terrible. I think it's really, really slow. Now, I said that about things like the Forest Aid in the past, but the upside with the Forest Aid is just how much raw value it generated, right? It's all those reload opportunities. This card doesn't really do that. It's just this sort of normal follow-up we already see in Druid, and like 2 Blessing of the Ancients gives you the same buff, and although this gives taunt, I just don't really think that's worth much. Typically, in these styles of deck, when you're buffing your minions in wide board token decks, you're just ending the game. You're Savage Roaring, you're Blessing of the Ancients, you're hitting your opponent for a ton of damage. And I don't think the potential to kind of stabilize behind a wall of small taunts is enough to make this worth it. Instead, it's just really, really slow compared to other buffs, and most decks that are playing that style would vastly prefer the cheap buff that they can play on, turn 3 if they need to, instead of this incredibly inflexible and rigid card that might have a very occasional upside compared to every other option that exists. So no, I don't see any reason this would be played. It looks worse than so many other comparable cards, things like Level Up in the past. It's so much slower than that. So unfortunately for me, Gift of the Wild falls really far short of the mark. It's like getting socks for Christmas if we're talking about the gift. This one's just not getting there. This is a pretty bad card. Moving on, here we have Righteousness for Paladin, a new 5-mana spell that gives your minions Divine Shield. So this is another wide board follow-up sort of card. You build a nice big board and you make them more resilient, a bit like our previous card. But unlike our previous card, no defensive utility in this one, which certainly limits its applications a little bit. And when I think about this card, I guess I first thought of Lotheb. It kind of reminds me of this card where you build a big board and you want to protect it. And in the old days, you'd play Lotheb, and it would increase the cost of your opponent's spells, and you'd basically lock them out of doing anything to protect your minions and set up like lethal push scenarios. Righteousness in some ways could do the same sort of thing. You build a wide board and you play Divine Shields, and hopefully that protects your minions enough so that you can go face. But of course, that effect is not as powerful. Divine Shields aren't nearly as good as the increased cost from Lotheb, because the Divine Shield, still gets pinged off by lackeys and hero powers and so on and so forth, and they could still kill a couple of your minions instead of, being denied completely from an opportunity. They still have options to get through it. And beyond that, there's no 5/5. There's no attached body on something like Righteousness. So far weaker than a card like Lotheb, but doing the same sort of thing, I think. Now, Lotheb certainly had other applications as well, but in that particular wide board scenario. So what we're looking at here is a card that, to me, it's another win more card where you've got to have a board. You've got to be ahead for it to be good. And even then, it doesn't help you end the game right away. Just sort of stalls it out for another turn or two, buys you some opportunities, but doesn't serve as that finishing piece of the puzzle that you often really need. So Paladin is a class that has these opportunities for wide boards. I don't think this card's totally hopeless. I just don't think it's particularly good. Now let's take a look at Siegebreaker for Warlock, a new 7-mana 5/8 demon with Taunt, and your other demons have +1 attack. This card's all over the place, right? So you got a big defensive minion here that looks okay, probably something you wouldn't hate playing some of the time. Certainly in Arena, it's a cool looking card. But then you've got this demons have plus attack buff, and I don't really think this card follows up with that. You're looking at a big defensive card that you play in the late game. You're not likely to have a lot of demons on board. So this effect seems to go, counter to what this card is primarily about when you look at every other number and effect on the card. So if, it was like a 3-mana minion and it had that, you'd be excited because you could play it in a zoo deck, get yourself a nice aggressive start and follow up with something like a Siegebreaker. But instead, you've left with this card that probably doesn't ever really buff anything at all. Now, there are scenarios like off of Gul'dan, you resummon this and it buffs your Gul'dan board, but Gul'dan rotated to Wild, where you have cards like Mal'Ganis that just do this way, way better. So I look at this card and I'm just left wondering, what does it do and who really needs that and why do they care and what other alternatives exist? And I think every direction I look, there's probably just some better option. There's probably a better taunt minion. There's a better follow-up plus damage card out there as well. So why are you playing Siegebreaker? And I can't really solve that. I don't know if there's any magical demon synergy deck out there that gets this card to a point where it's relevant. So it certainly looks fine in some ways, but just at the end of the day, we'll get left out. There's no reason to run this. It will be cut from deck lists, and therefore will end up looking like a rather weak card. Moving on, we have the Baron's Stable Hand, a 7-mana 4/4 Battlecry summon a random beast. And that's bad. On average, beasts in Hearthstone are really low-cost cards. There's all those 1, 2, and 3 drops. And for this to make sense, it probably needs to be like a 5 or 6 drop. You probably need Savannah Highmane. You can compare this really directly to something like Spiteful Summoner, which was decent when it summoned 8/8s and 10/10s and 12/12s, but that's very rare with the Beast pool. That's going to happen 1 out of 100 times, right? You're going to get King Crush so occasionally that very rare upside is not worth the multiple instances of downside. So this is an incredibly high-risk kind of card. Maybe another one of those things that's fine in Arena, but in a constructed format, there are going to be so many things that are way more consistent and reliable. This will backfire so often that you just can't risk it, and that's why this is a pretty bad card. Up next here, we have Arcane Devourer, an 8 mana 5/5 elemental. And it reads, whenever you cast a spell, gain +2/+2. So this is like the super old man mana worm, I guess. And it's just way, way too slow. For all the reasons that you care about gaining nice buffs, turn 8 is not when that happens, right? You want those in the early game. You want to create pressure. You want to create a lot of tempo advantage. You want to overwhelm your opponent before they can respond. And committing 8 mana to a card like this with very little opportunities for follow-up is not how you do that. You'd rather run Questing Adventurer, Mana Worms, etc. This just comes way too late in the game. I don't think it makes sense even in like a Conjurer's Mage with a bunch of cheap spells. Like, yeah, you could build yourself like, you know, a 15/15 minion, but it's still very susceptible to removal. There are a lot more ways to make big minions that are far more efficient and far less risky than this one. So, of course, this card just looks like a throwaway, slow, late game kind of thing. I'm not even sure this is going to be that strong in Arena because spells are pretty hard to come by in Arena sometimes, or at least, you know, getting them all out and playing them. And it just sits there weakly as a 5/5 most of the time, the turn you play it, and dies before you ever even get an opportunity. So, across the board, far too slow and not enough upside. This is another pretty terrible card. Up next here, we have Plaguebringer, a new basic card for Rogue, replacing Vanish. 4 mana 3/3 with the Battlecry, give a friendly minion poisonous. And we saw this style effect in the past with Plague Scientist, which was a 3 mana card that did the same thing on a combo. So a little bit more consistent than a Plague Scientist here, but a little more expensive too at 4 mana. And I think that will probably be the big problem for this card is you got to have some reason you want to play this on curve, and that means you need a good 3-drop. And although Rogue certainly has some 3-drops with some survivability right now with things like Evil Miscreant, how often are you going to be trading those up into something really big on turn 4, right? Like maybe a Mountain Giant occasionally. So I don't think it's impossible that there's a meta where this lines up fairly well as a relevant on-curve answer to a big threat. Like this might even be that meta to some extent. But I think most of the time it's going to be a little bit expensive and awkward to use, and you don't really have a minion for it, and you're going to give stuff poisonous defensively when it doesn't have initiative or the ability to attack, and then it just kind of sits there or dies to trades. So unlike Toxfin, which is a really cheap, flexible minion that you can play in an aggressive deck where you've got a lot of stuff on board and you don't mind doing it and it's happy to trade into a big taunt, I don't think Plaguebringer is going to line up nearly as well because it lacks that cost efficiency, and I don't even know that Rogue has that style of play nearly as much. But in a world where lackeys are out there and you're happy to trade in lackeys, maybe. I think this card has a little bit more hope than a lot of cards in this video for finding that perfect little groove. I don't think this is ever going to be a super relevant meta card that's a big part of a deck or the, you know, defining the class. But will a deck play it occasionally? Maybe. Up next here, we have Plaguebringer for Rogue, a new 4 mana 3/3 Battlecry, give a friendly minion poisonous. And I think this card is a little more intriguing and promising than pretty much every other card on this video so far, because we have seen a comparable card like this in the past, Plague Scientist, a 3 mana card that had the combo give a friendly minion poisonous. It was played a little bit, not a ton. But for the same reasons it was a possibility, I think Plaguebringer could be solid too. There are basically 2 ways that you want to play this card, right? You have a little small thing on board, and you play the Plaguebringer, and you trade it up into a big thing, and you're super excited. Something like we see nowadays with Toxfin in Murloc Shaman. Now, I don't think Plaguebringer is nearly as strong as Toxfin because it's far less efficient from a cost standpoint. It doesn't line up nearly as well on curve. It doesn't synergize in a Murloc deck, like, you know, Toxfin is perfect in a Murloc deck where you're trading in tiny stuff. That's what Murlocs are all about. Rogue and Plaguebringer might not be nearly well as suited to that, although lackeys do present an opportunity where you have some 1/1s lingering around and you don't mind trading them in. The downside for that style of play with Plaguebringer is that sometimes it will just get stranded in your hand where you just have to play a minion and Plaguebringer at the same turn and it doesn't have initiative or the ability to attack. Rush can fix that, or charge. But it's all kind of conditional and it doesn't always line up. So there's a degree of awkwardness. Another interesting way to use this card, though, is with things like Wild Pyromancer. Any sort of AoE effect can create some pretty cool combos, right? You can give a Wild Pyromancer poisonous and then just like backstab something or just send an eviscerate to the face, any kind of spell, and suddenly you're clearing a board. And we've seen this used to success in a deck like Mech Hunter with Venomizer and Missile Launcher as this kind of late game stabilization board clear if they fall behind. And I could see a world where an aggressive rogue deck creates that opportunity, sets that up, so if they need to, they can just wipe the board clean, start over, and maybe, get a second wind and overwhelm their opponent. So I do see a couple different ways this card could see played. I don't really think it's going to be everywhere. I don't think it's like a class-defining sort of card, but it does have some potential. All right, moving on here to Radiance. It's our second basic card replacement, taking the place of Mind Blast, and it's a 1-mana pre-spell, of course. Restore 5 health to your hero. And as we've seen before, just a 1-mana spell giving you 5 health is not that impactful. Ironhide in Warrior, and then Flash Heal in Priest was decent, and this is very similar. But Flash Heal you could use on minions, and in fact, you could even use it on enemy minions with things like Arcane Soul Priest, so it had some combo potential and some other synergies. This is very restricted in what it can do. It's only healing your hero. Now, I will say Priest does have some heal synergies. Things like Gadgetzan Auctioneer are pretty cool with this card as well. So maybe in like a Nomi-style Priest, it makes sense, but most of the time, I just don't think this does enough. It doesn't give you enough oomph for that card in your list. Like, you've got to draw the card. It's got to do something. Most of the time, this doesn't do that much. And even though Priest likes healing and likes staying alive, I think there are going to be far better alternatives to do that than Radiance. And then finally here, one last card, the SI7 Infiltrator, a 4-mana 5/4. The battle cry, destroy a random enemy secret. So we're getting some secret tech in the classic set, which I think is really cool to give a nice answer to secrets in the base set there. That's really important because there's a lot of secrets in the classic set, but not that many answers. They have to keep like printing new stuff all the time. And this minion looks solid. A 5/4 stat line for 4 is really good. You might want to run this in aggressive decks where you need to push through secrets. You're worried about explosive traps and stuff. You slam the Infiltrator. You feel okay playing it because it's solid, aggressively statted minion, and you get some secrets out of the way. Now, again, as a tech card, not everybody's going to play this all the time. It's a random secret. It's only one, so it doesn't always answer everything. If a hunter goes crazy and plays 4 things, it's pretty risky. But occasionally it'll line up just fine, and I'm sure there will be some deck out there or some meta where this one fits. Will it be a great card? No. Will it be an okay card occasionally? Yes, perhaps so. All right, folks, that wraps it up for our detailed reviews. Now let's jump into the quick reviews. High Inquisitor Whitemane is a 2-star card. Brightwing is a 3-star card. Gift of the Wild is a 1-star card. Righteousness is a 2-star card. Siegebreaker is a 2-star card. Baron's Stablehand is a 2-star card. Arcane Devourer is a 1-star card. Plaguebringer is a 3-star card. Radiance is a 2-star card. SI7 Infiltrator is a 3-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for this crazy, unexpected card review. I did this one live on stream with the help of Twitch chat. So hopefully it felt about the same as normal. Nothing too crazy, but I'm sure they gave me some good advice and feedback. So shout out to my Twitch chat out there. You guys should come watch me on Twitch. We have a really good time. If you're not watching, like, my God, there's a link in the comments below. I'm going to put it down there. Come watch on Twitch. Come hang out. We got how many people here? 406 cool people hanging out right now. Like, come on, YouTube. Come on. Come hang out. That's it, everybody. Leave your feedback on these cards in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.